Welcome back to the Wisdom of the Donut Hole podcast by Ugly Moose Alaska, the podcast about books by true-to-life crime author Ron Walden. Find us wherever you download your favorite podcasts, subscribe, like, and be sure to tell your friends. There's also a new ordering option for readers. Order your books at ronwalden.com by going to his products page, using the link at the top right of his website. It's very simple, and they make great gifts. Simply choose a book description, highlight and copy the link to your browser and press enter. The landing page provides simple ordering, ships directly to you or any recipient you choose to send a gift to. It's so easy that even I can do it. This episode is Ron Walden's novel from 2012, Blue Sky and Green Grass, Murder, Money Laundering, and Winter Farming in Alaska. How could Alaska, the new state that allowed personal use of marijuana early in its growth, ever be a crossroads of pot smuggling for profit? Alaska residents can use or possess legal amounts of medical and recreational marijuana. Alaska residents must be at least 21 years of age to buy cannabis without a prescription. Medical cannabis is available to all registered patients. Minors having qualifying conditions can buy this kind of weed with the help of their caregivers. Alaska residents can buy up to 1 ounce of weed for both recreational and medical use. And they can grow up to 6 cannabis plants on their private properties. Penalties for violating Alaska marijuana laws range from misdemeanor to felony, depending on the severity of the crime. Throughout our podcasts, you can see our show notes at www.wisdomofthedonutholeblog.blogspot.com for any reference details, articles, and links. The U.S. Coast Guard's aviationhistory.org carried an article describing how and why the Coast Guard became the lead agency for maritime drug interdiction in 1976 as the marijuana war began. Imagine the incentive to engage in large-scale maritime marijuana smuggling where enormous profits can be realized. Good-grade Colombian marijuana was purchased at the supply end for about $35 a pound in 1976. The cost of a pound of marijuana at wholesale in the southeast United States averaged about $450 per pound. The average ship carried between 10 and 15 tons of marijuana. A shipment of 24,000 pounds would generate a gross profit of almost $10 million. The ship had a captain, engineer, and depending on its size, 8 to 10 crew, representing a cost of about $350,000 for manning and operating expenses. Aircraft surveillance would run about $275,000. A chase boat and offload boats would add another $250,000. Handlers and offload storage cost about another $200,000. Then there's a payment of $1 million to a middleman, and the principal still made about $7.8 million on each successful 2 to 3 week round trip. Of course, Florida and the East Coast points of delivery were close and they were easy to get to, but profits remained significant. Now imagine tapping into the underserved market of Alaskans, provide a high THC product, and create a uniquely inexpensive delivery system, and you have a Canadian connection that provided bales of Alaska high-quality pot, using Alaska as a stop on a worldwide delivery system, and you have at least some version of what BC Bud was, the Canadian trafficking cartel. An Anchorage Daily News article in 2009 described a man, a small player in the process, as being sentenced for supporting a marijuana smuggling operation in Alaska. The show notes at Wisdom of the Donut Hole blog at .blogspot.com have details and links. In 2009, a man we'll call Mr. H, with ties to a multi-million-dollar marijuana smuggling operation, was sentenced in federal court to about 10 months for conspiracy to commit money laundering. He was ordered to serve 5 months in prison and 5 months of home confinement, and to pay a fine of $6,000. In March 2005, a leader of a major drug operation called BC Bud, smuggling marijuana from Canada to Alaska, they had a middleman buy a motorhome in an enclosed trailer. After he bought the vehicles, the Canadian ringleader gave the middleman $93,000 in cash as a down payment, planning to pay the rest in $5,000 increments. In total, this middleman, now serving a 30-year sentence for his role in the drug operation, gave Mr. H about $150,000 in cash for his role, his small role in BC bud. The chief U.S. District Court judge told Mr. H when he was imposing the sentence, "When people are engaged in a serious criminal activity, don't help them out." Mr. H also forfeited his interest in the motorhome and the trailer. The Sinaloa cartel, once headed by the notorious kingpin El Chapo and others in Mexico, they continue to target Alaska with drug pipelines, adding to the overdose death according to a new investigative report from the Louisville Courier-Journal. It is difficult to reach much of the state, so there are fewer criminal networks competing for customers in Alaska, which means drug traffickers can triple or even quadruple their price and net larger profits. The head of the Federal Criminal Prosecutions for Alaska's U.S. Attorney's Office said, "All drug dealers are aware they can make more money selling drugs in Alaska." Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan issued a reaction to the newspaper report. Dozens were indicted in a drug ring targeting Alaska communities. More than 50 people were charged in 9 criminal indictments over 7 months. Defendants conspired to bring fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine from Mexico into Alaska. Court records showed some of the indicted members of the drug ring were inmates at Alaska's correctional facilities. The drug ring was headed by a 57-year-old California inmate using cell phones smuggled into prison to communicate with suppliers in Mexico, Oregon, and California who shipped drugs to Alaska. He was also accused of recruiting inmates set for release from Alaska's Highland Mountain Correctional Facility to participate in this drug ring. Indictments included charges for distribution of fentanyl, resulting in an overdose death. More than 25 other defendants were charged in this case with money laundering, conspiracy to promote the drug trafficking organization, which was also connected to the murder of 2 women, according to one of the indictments. Per the Anchorage Press, Alaska researchers are using a new technique to map marijuana to its source. You can see more in our show notes at wisdomofthedonutholeblog.blogspot.com, and they have referenced details, articles, and links. The BC bud marijuana smuggling came across the border to Alaska hidden under wooden boards covering the frame of a long flatbed trailer, the kind you might use to haul heavy equipment. One big bust in April 2006 by the DEA filled up about 10 cardboard boxes with 308 pounds of British Columbia pot. Arrests ended 6 years of smuggling for the drug ring, but not before they transported roughly 2,200 pounds of marijuana worth an estimated $10 million into Alaska. It was not the highest quality per local pot smokers, but it was good enough to compete with the high-quality Alaska-grown pot and flood the market. Law enforcement have long suspected Alaska as both an exporter and importer of marijuana. Alaska's black market, once thought to be awash in its own excellent marijuana, seems in fact to be a crossroads for some of the best pot in the world. When cops seize marijuana from drug dealers, such as the ones using the flatbed trailer, they have a fair chance of tracking down where it came from. When they seize it at the source, the grow room, for example, they know exactly where it came from. What Alaska law enforcement has not had until now is a quantitative way to tell how much of Alaska's pot was grown here and how much was grown elsewhere, nor could they pinpoint the geographic area of a particular bag of pot. Now researchers and police at the University of Alaska Fairbanks might have a way to find out exactly where in the world those buds were grown. The facility is part of the Institute of Northern Engineering at UAF, analyzes stable isotopic signatures of thousands of samples including water, glacier ice cores, animal fur and feathers. Most recently they've been analyzing marijuana. It can even be used to track people. While his wife, now also a UAF professor, was living in Boston, one researcher frequently traveled between there and Fairbanks. He saved his fingernail clippings from these trips and sampled his own hair. Isotopes present in the hair and nails were consistent with isotopic signatures of wherever he was when they were collected, either Boston or Fairbanks. Armed with those results, he and his wife co-authored a paper that was accepted by the Rapid Communications and Mass Spectrometry, the premier academic journal in this field. If they can track people, dinosaurs, and glaciers, why not pot? Alaska legalized recreational and medical use of marijuana with some restrictions, but there's still money to be made, lots of it, in the Alaska pot growing and smuggling game. You'll enjoy this story, love the heroes, and even like some of the bad guys in Ron Walden's book, Blue Sky and Green Grass, Murder, Money Laundering, and Winter Farming in Alaska. A trapper flying out to his trap line one freezing morning discovered an airplane nose down in the trees. He lands on the frozen lake to find the pilot dead, frozen in his seat. 4 duffels piled behind the pilot contained marijuana, a briefcase filled with cash, and a Colt .45 pistol. Ultimately deciding to keep the money, surmising it wouldn't be missed, his greed draws a cartel's henchmen to retrieve it. The ensuing investigation by Alaska State Troopers and NTSB exposes a huge grow operation and worldwide narcotics distribution. Informants surface. Circumstantial evidence is gathered, but hard evidence connecting a suspect is lacking. Vicious henchmen don't make it any easier either. Alaska State Trooper pilot Karen Holmes and fellow Trooper Craig Stanton investigate among daring rescues and routine duties. Be with them as they unravel this frustrating, complicated, and dangerous case spanning Alaska's metro and wilderness areas. The Trapper. At age 62, hair turning gray and joints beginning to get stiff, Ken appreciated the ease of using his Super Cub to check his trap lines. As a crow flies, it was only about 20 miles to where he'd check his first string of traps. He'd take a little extra time to look for any wolves in the area before landing near his first set. Near the lake, he caught sight of something in the trees about 150 yards from shore. He circled around the site. It was an airplane in the trees, standing on its propeller cone. With the wind calm, he landed straight ahead, then taxied to the shoreline. Not wanting to rapidly lose engine heat, he pulled the engine cover from the rear seat, covered the engine cowling, slipped into his snowshoes, zipped up his parka, and made his way through the thick spruce thicket to the crash site. Through the windshield, he could see the pilot was still in his seat. Using a piece of dead spruce as a ladder, he climbed high enough to reach the door handle and open it. He checked for a pulse. There was none. The pilot was dead. He was frozen in his seat. Ken had no way of knowing when the crash had happened, but he'd been on this lake 4 days earlier and the plane wasn't there then. Pausing to think, he spotted a shiny metal briefcase against the windshield with a bloody wound on the back of the pilot's head. Maybe the case had struck him from behind during the impact. He pulled the case from its perch, tossed it to the ground, and slid carefully down to the ground. He slipped into the harness of his snowshoes and tugged on the rubber bands around his heels. Then he retrieved the briefcase. He trudged back to the lake to his own airplane where he pulled his cell phone from his pocket. No signal. Figures, he thought. Kicking off his snowshoes, he tossed them into the rear of the Cub. He placed the briefcase in the pilot's seat. Finally, he pulled the engine cover from the nose and stuffing it into the back seat of the little airplane. As he was about to climb into his seat, he saw the metal case again. He thumbed the latches and it opened. Ken was surprised by what he saw inside. Cash. Lots of cash. Thousands in cash. And a Colt Series 80 .45 caliber pistol. Stunned, he closed the lid and put the case in the back with his snowshoes and engine cover. He started the engine, turned the little craft around, and took off across the lake. At 1,500 feet, he keyed the microphone. Anchorage Center, Piper 1362 Delta. Piper 62 Delta, Anchorage Center. Are you reporting inbound? No, sir, I'm reporting an aircraft accident. 62 Delta, what is the nature of your emergency? I found a downed aircraft. He read the GPS coordinates. It's a Cessna 206 yellow over white. He included the aircraft tail number. This is a fatality accident. The body of the pilot is still in the aircraft. Anchorage Center notified the Rescue Coordination Center and the Alaska State Troopers. A minute later, a voice was back. 62 Delta, are you still in the area of the crash? Affirmative. I'll land on Lake Whitso and wait for the troopers. I'll be out of radio contact until they're close to the site. Thank you, Delta 62. Troopers will contact you there. Landing on the lake, he covered the engine again, then thought about the cash behind his seat and the things he could do with that kind of cash. He opened the case and counted the cash. Banded in $5,000 bundles, it totaled $104,000. The temptation was just too great. He made the decision quickly, putting $1,500 into the briefcase with the Colt. The rest he buried in his trap basket in the back seat. He put on his snowshoes and returned to the Cessna. Climbing the makeshift ladder again, he placed the briefcase against the windshield where he'd found it. Wearing gloves all day, fingerprints wouldn't be a problem. In the rear of the wreck, he found a duffel bag tied into each of the 4 seats. Climbing down again, he hiked back to his own plane. Sitting inside waiting for officers to arrive, he couldn't help wonder about the cash and cargo. Who was this guy? Why did he crash? The front of the Cessna had surprisingly little damage. Ken's guess was the engine wasn't running at the time of the crash. Maybe the pilot had lost an engine and stalled into the trees, trying to make a safe landing on the lake. He'd been inside his own airplane for nearly an hour when he heard a helicopter approaching. Ken climbed out of his Cub and waited for the Robertson R-44 to land on the ice. He turned his back to the swirling snow flurry the helicopter rotor blades caused. As the rotors slowed, he could see the pilot was a female trooper. She let the blade spin to a stop, then bounced energetically to the ground. She climbed up to place cold protection on the engine of her aircraft. Climbing down again, she approached Ken. Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Karen Holmes was a muscular woman with sandy blonde hair and an athletic spring to her step. She'd attended Idaho State University, majoring in criminal justice, and was active in the Marine ROTC program. Upon graduation, she enlisted, completing the Marine Corps boot camp, and was admitted to helicopter flight training. Assigned to a flight group in Florida when she wasn't flying, she worked in the office of the Provost Marshal. She was deployed to Iraq in an Apache gunship. She loved flying the Apache. It fed her appetite for excitement. After her second tour, she lost her craving for that adrenaline. Upon completion of her enlistment, she returned to her home in southern Idaho and then to the University of Washington for her master's degree. A year later, degrees in hand, she was recruited by the Alaska State Troopers. With her helicopter portfolio completed and Trooper Academy finished, she was ready to go to work. She did her apprenticeship on road patrol and investigations when an opening for the helicopter pilot was offered to her. 6 years later, here she was investigating the plane crash. But this investigation would expand well beyond Alaska, beyond the plane crash and into a world of high-stakes violence, international foes, and the unique, profitable world of winter farming in Alaska. Follow Alaska State Trooper Pilot Sergeant Karen Holmes and Trooper Craig Stanton as they learn who to trust and who to fear when they track down murderers, money, cartels, and danger in the harsh seasons of Alaska's cities and backcountry in blue sky and green grass, murder, money laundering, and winter farming in Alaska. All of Ron's books are available wherever books are sold, including your hometown bookstores and online. Ask for Ron Walden's books if you don't see them on the shelves. Buying locally is always the best. Remember that show notes can be found at www.wisdomofthedonutholeblog.blogspot.com for links, articles, and to the places and key elements of these stories. Please check those out. Go to ronwalden.com to see how easy it is to order your favorite Ron Walden book directly. And when we return next month with Ron's 5th novel, which was published in 2013, Poacher's Paradise, an Alaska wildlife and a U.S. wildlife officer patrol bear baiting sites along Mystery Creek on Alaska's Kenai Peninsula. Finding a moose poached and the poacher dead, mauled by a bear, an investigation into a poaching family begins. Poacher's Paradise reveals perils, adventures, and dangers of Alaska wildlife troopers and what they face. Also included is the true account of Alaska Department of Fish and Wildlife Officer Al Bearbait Thompson, as told by his wife Joyce, who was with him throughout the entire ordeal. She details the attack, the mauling, the dramatic 17-mile trek to rescue. Al's service after statehood made Alaska's Fish and Wildlife Division what it is today. Ron Walden's wife Betty worked with Al for many years. Listen, like, subscribe on all major platforms including iTunes, Spotify, Samsung, Audible, iHeart, YouTube, and more. Look for new episodes each month. Order your books today. Check out ronwalden.com. It's very simple and they make great gifts. I'm your host, Scott Walden. Visit Alaska, buy your pot legally and locally or not at all. Read Ron's books, subscribe and like our podcast. Be sure to look at the episode transcripts And that amazing background music you hear is the Wisdom of the Donut Hole theme by Ray Langford of Shoshone County, Idaho. Look for more of Ray's music, including his debut album of Many Rivers and another album coming soon, available on Bandcamp and on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening.